Everyone ignored the poor single mom, until the Mafia Boss stopped his convoy just for her. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day and that a little extra luck finds you wherever you are. Before we dive into today's unforgettable story, may I borrow just 5 seconds of your good fortune? Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That small gesture means more than you know and helps us keep bringing heartfelt stories like this to you. Thank you so much for your kindness, your support, and for being part of this amazing community. Now tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? I'd truly love to know. And with that, let's begin today's incredible story. The world doesn't always change with a gunshot. Sometimes, it changes because one powerful man decides to stop his car. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the streets of downtown Chicago into shimmering rivers that reflected neon lights and impatient faces. I pulled my thin jacket tighter around my shoulders, but did nothing to keep the cold from sinking into my bones. My 6-year-old daughter, Lily, rested against my chest, her tiny arms wrapped weakly around my neck as her forehead burned with fever. Every breath she took sounded just a little harder than the last, and every second that passed made the fear inside me grow heavier. I'd already called 3 ride shares. Every driver canceled after seeing the traffic. 2 taxis sped right past us without even slowing down. The city was full of people, yet somehow I had never felt more invisible. I checked my phone again. 5% battery. No new messages. No miracles. The urgent care clinic was less than a mile away, but carrying Lily through the cold rain felt impossible. She stirred against me and whispered, "Mommy, are we almost there?" I forced the brightest smile I could manage. "Almost, sweetheart. Just stay with me." She nodded and closed her tired eyes again, trusting me the way only a child could. That trust hurt more than anything because I wasn't sure I could keep my promise. A businessman brushed past us without making eye contact. "Hey." Young couple hurried across the crosswalk laughing beneath a large umbrella. Someone accidentally bumped my shoulder hard enough to make me lose my balance, but nobody looked back. Nobody apologized. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply exhausted. 3 jobs had taught me that people often noticed expensive shoes before they noticed desperate eyes. My waitress shift had ended less than an hour earlier. My hands still smelled faintly of coffee and dish soap. I hadn't eaten since breakfast because every extra dollar belonged to Lily, not me. Rent was due in 4 days. My checking account barely covered groceries. Life had become a never-ending calculation of what we could survive without. Then the city suddenly grew quiet. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But one by one, conversations stopped. Car horns disappeared. Pedestrians stepped back from the curb. Police officers began redirecting traffic with unusual urgency. I looked up and saw the reason. A convoy of glossy black SUVs slowly approached the intersection like a moving wall of polished steel. At least 20 vehicles stretched down the avenue, each identical to the next. Their headlights reflected across the rain-soaked pavement while security motorcycles cleared every lane ahead. Even strangers who had ignored me seconds before now stood respectfully behind the barriers, watching the procession with wide eyes. I hugged Lily closer and took 1 step backward. Whoever was inside those vehicles belonged to a world that had never belonged to people like us. I lowered my head, hoping the convoy would pass quickly so I could keep searching for someone, anyone, willing to help us. I had no idea that before the next minute was over, every one of those black SUVs would come to a complete stop because of us. The lead SUV rolled another few feet before its brake lights flared bright red through the rain. Then the second stopped, the third, the fourth. Within seconds, the entire convoy stood perfectly still, stretching down the avenue like a line of black dominoes that had suddenly refused to fall. Confused whispers spread through the crowd. Drivers leaned out of their windows. Even the police officers, directing traffic, exchanged uncertain glances. This was not supposed to happen. People with that kind of power did not stop for ordinary strangers. They expected everyone else to move. I tightened my grip around Lily, convinced there had been an accident farther ahead. It had nothing to do with us. It cannot possibly have anything to do with us. A security motorcycle pulled to the curb, followed by two men in tailored black coats who stepped out of the nearest SUV. They moved with calm precision, scanning every direction without appearing rushed. Their expressions never changed. One lifted a hand to his ear, speaking quietly into a microphone hidden beneath his collar. Another opened the rear passenger door of the largest vehicle in the middle of the convoy. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. A man stepped onto the rain-soaked pavement. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal overcoat that fit him perfectly despite the weather. Dark hair brushed neatly back, calm gray eyes that missed nothing. As the wind shifted his coat, I caught a glimpse of intricate black ink climbing the side of his neck before disappearing beneath his collar. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Every person around him instinctively made space without being asked. I had never seen anyone command silence simply by walking. One of the officers straightened his posture immediately. A valet across the street lowered his head. Even people who had been recording with their phones slowly put them down. I looked away before our eyes could meet. Men like that belonged in headlines, not in the life of a waitress who counted grocery coupons every Sunday night. Lily stirred again, her breathing warmer against my shoulder. "Mommy," she whispered weakly. "I am cold." My heart tightened. I rubbed her back gently and kissed the top of her damp hair. "I know, sweetheart. We will get somewhere warm soon." I was speaking more to myself than to her. Then I heard polished shoes splash through shallow puddles. The footsteps stopped only a few feet away. I lifted my eyes slowly. He was looking directly at Lily, not at me. His expression remained controlled, yet something softened almost imperceptibly when he noticed how pale her little face had become. "How long has she had a fever?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, and surprisingly gentle. It took me a second to realize he was speaking to me. "Since early this afternoon," I answered carefully. "The clinic is less than a mile away." I hated how defensive I sounded, as though I needed to justify standing on a sidewalk with a sick child. He glanced toward the endless line of vehicles behind him before returning his attention to Lily. "Why are you still here?" I swallowed. No one stopped. The words came out quietly, almost embarrassed. I wished I could take them back the moment I said them. His jaw tightened ever so slightly, not with anger toward me, but with the uncomfortable realization that he had just heard something he did not like. For several silent seconds, rain tapped softly against umbrellas and polished hoods while the city waited for his next decision. Then he turned his head toward the nearest security officer and spoke only 4 words. "Clear the road. Now." The words echoed across the intersection with quiet authority, yet they carried farther than any shout ever could. Within seconds, the officers directing traffic changed their positions. Security motorcycles rolled forward, and the endless line of black SUVs shifted with flawless precision. Drivers who had been waiting impatiently watched in stunned silence as every lane opened, creating a clear path straight toward the urgent care clinic less than a mile away. I stood frozen, unable to understand why an entire city block had suddenly rearranged itself for a waitress nobody had noticed 5 minutes earlier. The man turned back to me as though none of it had been extraordinary. "Your daughter needs a doctor," he said simply. "You should not waste another minute standing in the rain." I looked at the freshly cleared street, then back at him. "Thank you," I whispered, still holding Lily tightly. "We can walk from here." His eyes rested on my daughter once again. Her cheeks were flushed from fever, and a soft cough escaped her lips. He studied her for only a moment before speaking. "Walking will take too long." One of the security men had already opened the rear door of a nearby SUV, waiting respectfully without saying a word. My heart immediately tightened with suspicion. I had spent too many years learning that nothing expensive ever came without invisible strings attached. "I appreciate your kindness," I answered carefully, "but we will be all right." The security team exchanged brief glances, almost as if they were unaccustomed to hearing anyone refuse. The man himself, however, did not seem offended. If anything, the corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly, not into a smile, but into something closer to quiet curiosity. Most people ask me for favors before I even introduce myself, he said. You are doing the opposite. I shifted Lily gently in my arms. My mother used to tell me that accepting help and owing someone are not always the same thing, but sometimes it is difficult to know the difference. For the first time, something changed in his expression. It lasted only a heartbeat, but I could have sworn I saw genuine respect replace detached observation. Rain continued to fall between us while the city remained strangely still. Nobody honked. Nobody complained. Hundreds of strangers simply watched the conversation unfold. Lily opened her sleepy eyes and looked at the tall man standing in front of us. Sir, she murmured softly, are all those cars yours? A few nearby security officers lowered their heads, almost hiding amused smiles. The man looked at Lily, and the cold distance that surrounded him seemed to fade just enough to reveal the human being beneath it. For today, he answered gently. Lily nodded with complete seriousness. That is a lot of cars. Despite everything weighing on my heart, I almost laughed. Children had a way of reducing even the most intimidating moments into something wonderfully ordinary. He reached inside his coat, and instinctively I tensed, but instead of anything alarming, he simply removed a neatly folded black umbrella. He opened it above Lily first, making certain the rain no longer touched her face. Only afterward did he step slightly backward, allowing me to stand beneath its shelter as well. The gesture was so natural that it caught me completely off guard. He had protected my daughter before thinking about appearances or authority. Then he finally offered the words that explained nothing and somehow changed everything. My name is Damian Moretti. The name rippled through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Faces paled. Quiet conversations stopped instantly. I did not recognize the name, but judging from everyone else's reaction, I realized I probably should have. Damian held my gaze for another silent moment before speaking once more. Now, he said calmly, let's make sure Lily gets the care she needs. For a long moment, I simply stood there, staring at the open SUV door as rain drummed softly against the polished roof above it. Every instinct I had spent years developing told me to keep my distance. People with influence did not appear in struggling mothers' lives by accident. They arrived with expectations, contracts nobody could see, and favors that somehow lasted forever. Damian seemed to notice the hesitation in my eyes. You are deciding whether you should trust me, he said quietly. It was not a question. I shifted Lily slightly higher in my arms. Her breathing had become slower, but the warmth radiating from her forehead still frightened me. I'm deciding what is best for my daughter, I answered. His expression remained calm. Then we were trying to accomplish the same thing. Before I could respond, Lily reached one small hand toward the umbrella Damian was holding. Tiny drops of rain slid down its edge like silver beads. Mommy, she whispered, I want to go where it is warm. My heart finally surrendered. Not to Damian. To Lily. All right, I said softly. Just to the clinic. Damian gave a small nod, neither triumphant nor surprised. He simply stepped aside, allowing me to enter first. That simple gesture mattered more than he probably realized. He did not try to lead me. He gave me the choice. The inside of the SUV felt impossibly quiet compared to the storm outside. Soft leather seats, warm air, and the faint scent of cedar replaced cold rain and traffic noise. I carefully settled Lily against the seat, wrapping my jacket around her, legs before climbing in beside her. Damian entered only after both of us were comfortable, taking the seat across from us rather than beside me. Again, he respected a boundary I had never needed to explain. The door closed gently. Outside, the convoy began moving again with perfect coordination. Through the tinted windows, I watched buildings glide past while Chicago blurred beneath ribbons of rain. Nobody inside the vehicle spoke for nearly a full minute. The silence was strangely peaceful. Lily leaned against my shoulder, her eyelids growing heavier. Mommy, she murmured. The car feels like a blanket. I brushed damp strands of blonde hair away from her forehead. Try to rest, sweetheart. Damian watched quietly before asking, How old is she? She turned 6 in April. She is brave. I smiled faintly. She has to be. He looked toward the rain outside the window. Children should never have to be. There was something about the way he said those words that made me wonder if he was speaking from experience rather than opinion. I almost asked, but stopped myself. His life was none of my business. Mine certainly was not his. A few minutes later, the SUV slowed beneath the bright lights of the urgent care entrance. Before I reached for the door handle, Damien spoke again. One request. My muscles tensed instinctively. What is it? Allow the doctors to examine Lily without worrying about the bill today. I looked directly at him. I can pay. I believe you can, he replied without hesitation. That is not why I said it. His answer caught me completely off guard. There was no pity in his voice. No arrogance. Only quiet certainty. Every parent deserves to think about their child before they think about money. I opened my mouth to refuse again, but the automatic doors slid open ahead of us, and 2 nurses hurried outside, carrying a wheelchair after apparently receiving advance notice that a child with a high fever had arrived. As I carefully lifted Lily into my arms once more, I realized something impossible had happened during the short drive. For the first time in months, I was walking into a medical clinic thinking only about my daughter instead of how I would survive the bill afterward. The examination room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh coffee, a strangely comforting combination after the cold rain outside. Lily lay quietly on the small hospital bed while a pediatric nurse checked her temperature for the second time. I sat beside her, gently stroking her hand, counting every second until the doctor returned. Waiting had always been the hardest part. Your imagination could invent 1,000 terrible possibilities before a single test result arrived. Her fever is beginning to come down, the nurse said with a reassuring smile. The medication is already helping. I released a breath I had not realized I had been holding. Thank you. Those 2 simple words felt far too small for the relief flooding through my chest. A few minutes later, the physician entered carrying tablet. He smiled warmly at Lily before turning toward me. The good news is that she has a viral infection, not anything more serious. She needs plenty of fluids, rest, and medication for the fever. I expect she will feel much better within a couple of days. My eyes immediately filled with tears that I blinked away before anyone noticed. For the first time all evening, I allowed myself to believe everything would be all right. Lily looked up at me with tired blue eyes. Can we go home after this? She asked. I kissed her forehead. Yes, sweetheart. We're going home. The doctor handed me several printed instructions before quietly adding, Your paperwork has already been completed. I frowned. Completed? Yes, ma'am. Registration, medication, everything. My stomach tightened. There must be a mistake. He shook his head gently. No mistake. I knew exactly who had arranged it. The realization left me grateful and uncomfortable at the same time. I gathered Lily's jacket and carefully helped her sit up. Her cheeks still carried a hint of color from the fever, but she smiled for the first time that evening. That smile alone was worth more than anything else in the world. As we stepped into the lobby, I expected the black SUVs to be waiting outside. Instead, the entrance looked completely ordinary. Families came and went. Nurses hurried through automatic doors. Rain continued falling beyond the glass, but the convoy had disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. Only one familiar face remained. Damien stood near the front windows with a paper coffee cup in one hand, speaking softly with an elderly volunteer before noticing us. He ended the conversation immediately and walked toward Lily first. How are you feeling? He asked. Lily considered the question very seriously. Still sleepy. That is an honest answer. She smiled again. The doctor says I can have chicken soup. Damien nodded once. Doctors usually know what they are talking about. Lily giggled softly. The sound surprised both of us. Children always seemed capable of finding normal moments in extraordinary circumstances. I stepped forward before gratitude turned into another debt I could not repay. Thank you for everything you did tonight, I said sincerely. You did not have to stop. You certainly did not have to stay. He looked toward the rainy parking lot before answering. Sometimes people convince themselves they are too busy to notice someone who needs help. His gray eyes returned to mine. I try not to make that mistake. I reached into my purse and removed the small envelope containing the cash I had saved for Lily's appointment. It was almost everything I had managed to set aside over the past month. I held it toward him. Please take this. It is not much, but I cannot accept everything for free. Damien glanced at the envelope without reaching for it. Then he looked back at me with calm certainty. Keep it. I hesitated. I insist. His voice remained gentle, but completely firm. Then insist on buying Lily another warm meal after she recovers. That investment will earn far better returns than giving the money to me. For the second time that night, I found myself completely speechless. 3 days passed before I saw Damien Moretti again, yet somehow the memory of that rainy night refused to leave me. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm. I woke before sunrise, packed Lily's lunch, dropped her at school once her fever had completely disappeared, worked the breakfast shift at the diner, spent my afternoon cleaning offices downtown, and ended each evening balancing bills at my tiny kitchen table. Nothing about my routine had changed, except that every now and then I caught myself wondering whether that unbelievable night had actually happened or whether exhaustion had simply made it feel like a dream. Then reality reminded me exactly where I stood. Friday afternoon brought another unpleasant surprise. As I unlocked the mailbox outside my apartment building, I found a folded notice from the property management company. My lease would increase by almost $400 beginning the following month. I stared at the paper for several seconds, hoping the numbers would somehow rearrange themselves into something less impossible. They never did. $400 might not have meant much to someone living in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, but for me it meant groceries, electricity, and Lily's school supplies all competing for the same paycheck. I quietly folded the notice and slipped it into my purse before climbing the stairs. Lily was coloring at our tiny kitchen table when I walked inside. She looked up with the brightest smile in the world. Mommy, look, I drew us. She proudly held up a picture made with inexpensive crayons. There were 2 smiling stick figures holding hands beneath a huge yellow sun. Off to one side stood a very tall man holding a black umbrella. I blinked in surprise. Who is that? She answered as though it were obvious. The nice man who kept the rain away. Children remembered kindness differently than adults. They never measured it by money or status. They remembered how someone made them feel. I carefully taped the drawing to our refrigerator beside old report cards and grocery coupons. It is beautiful, I whispered. Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch beside one of her favorite storybooks, I quietly spread my bills across the kitchen table. Rent, utilities, school lunch account, medication from the clinic that insurance had not fully covered. I reached for my calculator before stopping halfway. There was no point. I already knew the answer. The numbers would never become smaller simply because I hoped they would. I rested my forehead against my folded hands and closed my eyes for just a moment. A soft knock at the apartment door pulled me back. My heart skipped. Hardly anyone visited us. Through the peephole, I found an elderly woman holding a covered casserole dish. Mrs. Henderson from downstairs smiled warmly as soon as I opened the door. I made too much chicken pot pie again, she said with a playful wink. You would be doing me a favor by taking some. We both knew that was not true. She had been quietly helping struggling neighbors for years without ever allowing them to feel embarrassed. I accepted the dish gratefully. Thank you. She looked past me, toward the sleeping Lily, and lowered her voice. Someone came by looking for you this afternoon. My stomach tightened immediately. Boo, a very polite young man in a dark suit. He did not leave his name. He only asked whether you and your little girl were doing well. My first thought was Damien. My second was confusion. Why would someone like him remember us at all? Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. Whoever he works for, she said softly. He looked relieved when I told him your daughter was healthy again. After she returned downstairs, I stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the quiet street below. Parked across from the building sat an ordinary gray sedan that I had never noticed before. Inside, a man lowered his newspaper just long enough to glance toward our apartment window. The moment our eyes almost met, he calmly started the engine and drove away into the evening traffic. The following Monday began like every other Monday in my life, with an alarm clock ringing before dawn and a quiet promise to myself that somehow we would make it through another week. Lily hugged me tightly before running through the doors of her elementary school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her laughter finally sounding like the healthy little girl I knew. Watching her disappear into the hallway filled me with relief I could not describe. Whatever happened to me afterward no longer mattered as much. My breakfast shift at the diner was already busy when I tied my apron around my waist. Coffee machines hissed. Plates clattered. Conversations blended into the familiar soundtrack that had become my second home. I greeted customers with the same smile I wore every morning, even when my feet already ached before 8 o'clock. Around lunchtime, the restaurant manager, Rick, waved me toward his office. His face carried the uncomfortable expression people wore when they had bad news but hoped someone else would deliver it instead. "Emily," he began carefully, "I need to reduce staff hours next month." My heart sank immediately. "How many?" He avoided my eyes. "Probably half your shifts." I felt the room become strangely quiet. Did I do something wrong? "No. You are one of the hardest workers I have ever hired." He sighed deeply. "The building owner raised our lease again. We have to cut expenses somewhere." I nodded slowly, even though every word landed like another weight on my shoulders. There was no point arguing with numbers. Numbers never listened. I folded my schedule and quietly thanked him before walking back into the dining room. Customers continued eating as though nothing had happened. Life always moved forward for everyone else. By the end of my shift, I found myself calculating rent again, then groceries, then Lily's winter clothes. Every calculation ended the same way. I was running out of options. As I stepped outside carrying my worn canvas bag, I noticed a luxury sedan parked across the street. It looked familiar, though I could not remember why. The tinted window lowered just enough for a silver-haired gentleman wearing a perfectly tailored suit to smile politely. "Miss Carter?" I hesitated. "Yes." He stepped out, keeping a respectful distance. "My name is Vincent. I work with Mr. Moretti." My pulse quickened. "Is everything all right?" "Very much so." He handed me a small cream-colored envelope. He asked me to deliver this personally. I accepted it cautiously. There was no company logo, only my name written neatly across the front. Before I could ask another question, Vincent added, "There are no obligations attached to it. He specifically instructed me to tell you that." Then he nodded politely and returned to the car without another word. I stood beneath the afternoon sun, staring at the envelope for almost a full minute before finally opening it. Inside was a simple handwritten note. The paper carried only one sentence. Kindness should never become another burden to carry. There was no signature because none was needed. Tucked behind the note was a business card with only a phone number and a single handwritten message on the back. "If Lily ever needs help, call at any hour." I closed my eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by emotions I could not easily separate. Gratitude, confusion, pride, fear. I slipped the card back into the envelope and placed it carefully inside my purse. I still did not know why a man with his influence continued thinking about two ordinary people he had met in the rain. But for the first time in years, I also realized something else. Somewhere in this enormous city, someone powerful had chosen not to forget my daughter's name. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later in the most ordinary way imaginable. It was tucked inside Lily's backpack between a spelling quiz and a drawing of a sunflower. I unfolded the cream-colored envelope, expecting another school announcement, but instead found a letter thanking parents for supporting the annual Children's Health fundraiser hosted at the Lakeshore Community Center. Admission was free, and every family was welcome. Lily bounced excitedly around our tiny living room. "They said there will be face painting and books, Mommy." I smiled despite everything weighing on my mind. We had not been anywhere together that did not involve work, bills, or doctor appointments in months. Then we were going. Saturday arrived with crisp autumn air and brilliant blue skies. For the first time in what felt like forever, neither of us carried an umbrella or hurried through the rain. Lily skipped beside me holding my hand while fallen leaves crunched beneath our shoes. The community center overflowed with laughter, balloons, and volunteers wearing matching blue shirts. Children raced between activity tables while parents talked over warm apple cider. Everything felt wonderfully normal. Lily disappeared toward the face-painting station after, promising not to wander too far. I found a quiet corner where local organizations displayed information about education, family services, and neighborhood programs. One exhibit caught my attention immediately. Large photographs covered an entire wall. A renovated children's hospital wing. Scholarships for nursing students. New playgrounds. Shelters for single mothers rebuilding their lives. Each project listed the same anonymous sponsor beneath it. The Moretti Foundation. I stood there reading every plaque twice, struggling to connect these quiet acts of generosity with the intimidating convoy that had once brought an entire city intersection to a standstill. A volunteer noticed my curiosity and smiled warmly. "Remarkable, is it not?" she asked. "Most people have no idea how many families receive help every year." "Does Mr. Moretti come here often?" I asked before I could stop myself. She laughed softly. "Almost never when cameras are around." Before I could ask another question, excited voices rippled across the room. People were not cheering. They were simply greeting someone with unexpected respect. I turned slowly. Damien had entered through a side door wearing dark jeans, a navy sweater, and a simple wool coat instead of an expensive suit. Without the long convoy and security formation surrounding him, he looked almost ordinary. Almost. His tattoos briefly appeared beneath the rolled sleeve of his sweater as he accepted a handmade thank you card from a little boy. Then he crouched to the child's eye level, listening with complete attention to whatever story was being told. No photographers followed him. No reporters waited nearby. He accepted every drawing and every awkward hug with patient kindness before quietly moving to the next family. It was a version of him the newspapers would probably never print. Lily spotted him before I did anything else. "Mommy!" she shouted happily, running toward us with bright green butterfly wings painted across her cheeks. Damien looked up immediately, and for the first time since we had met, a genuine smile reached his gray eyes. Lily threw her small arms around his waist without the slightest hesitation. I instinctively started forward to apologize, but Damien simply rested one gentle hand against her back and returned the hug with careful warmth. "You look much stronger," he said. Lily nodded proudly. "I finished all my medicine. I'm glad you listened to your mother." She grinned before racing back toward the craft table, leaving the two of us standing in comfortable silence. I looked at the photographs behind him, then back into his eyes. "You never told me about any of this." Damien followed my gaze toward the hospital pictures. His expression grew thoughtful. Some things are more meaningful when they're discovered instead of announced. At that moment, I realized the most powerful thing about Damien Moretti was not the convoy that stopped for strangers. It was the quiet life he had spent changing after everyone else had already looked away. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the community center parking lot as families slowly gathered their children and headed home. Lily skipped a few steps ahead of us, proudly carrying a paper bag filled with books, handmade crafts, and a tiny stuffed bear she had won during one of the games. Every few seconds, she turned around just to make sure both Damien and I were still following. She looked happier than I had seen her in a very long time. That simple sight made every difficult day behind us feel a little lighter. We reached the sidewalk where our paths would separate. I adjusted the strap of my worn handbag, suddenly unsure how to say goodbye to a man who had quietly changed our lives without ever asking for recognition. "I suppose this is where we thank each other one last time," I said with a small smile. Damien looked toward Lily before answering. "I hope not." His words were calm, but they carried an honesty that immediately caught my attention. "People often believe kindness is meant to be a single moment," he continued. "I think it is something you choose again and again." Before I could respond, Lily ran back toward us and slipped one tiny hand into mine and the other into Damien's. "Can we walk together a little longer?" she asked hopefully. Damien looked at me instead of answering her. The choice was Mine. I smiled for the first time without hesitation. A few more blocks. Lily beamed as though we had given her the greatest gift imaginable. We walked beneath rows of golden maple trees while the city around us carried on with its ordinary afternoon. Nobody stopped to stare. Nobody hurried us along. For once, life felt wonderfully simple. As we reached the neighborhood where my apartment stood, Damien slowed his steps. "Emily," he said quietly, "I have spent years building businesses, solving problems, and protecting people I care about. Yet somehow the hardest thing I have learned is that not everyone needs to be rescued. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to stand beside them." I met his steady gray eyes. "That is because dignity matters just as much as help." He nodded once. "You reminded me of that." His words settled gently into my heart. For so long I had measured my worth by overdue bills, endless shifts, and the fear of never having enough. Standing beside him, I finally realized that resilience was also something my daughter had been watching every single day. Lily suddenly tugged gently on Damien's sleeve. "Mommy says heroes are the people who stay after everyone else leaves." Damien crouched to her height, his expression softening completely. "Your mother sounds very wise." Lily grinned proudly. "She is." Damien stood again, and for a brief moment neither of us spoke. Then, with quiet respect, he reached out and lightly brushed a loose strand of hair away from my face before asking, "May I?" I understood what he meant. Instead of answering with words, I stepped a little closer. His gentle kiss against my forehead lasted only a moment, filled not with possession but with gratitude, trust, and the promise of something neither of us wanted to rush. When we finally looked at one another again, the future no longer felt frightening. It felt possible. 1 year later, Lily and I stood outside a bright little house with a white porch and fresh flower boxes beneath every window. It was not a mansion. It was not a palace. It was simply a home filled with laughter, peace, and second chances. A familiar line of black SUVs rolled quietly to the curb. But this time they were not stopping because of an emergency. They had come to bring family together for Sunday dinner. As Damien walked toward us, smiling, Lily ran into his arms without hesitation, and I realized that the day he chose to notice one exhausted mother standing alone in the rain was also the day all three of our lives quietly began again.